She was born into a fairy tale that the world wrote for her before she could speak. And for nearly 7 decades, she's been living inside it. The beautiful parts and the devastating ones alike. At 69, Princess Caroline of Monaco carries more loss than most people will ever know in a lifetime. The death of a mother, the death of a husband, the collapse of marriages, the weight of a title she never fully chose. And through all of it, she has kept showing up. But the story that Monaco rarely tells, the full story, the honest one, begins not with glamour. It begins with a little girl who ate her meals alone. On January 23rd, 1957, inside the Prince's Palace of Monaco, a baby girl arrived and was immediately assigned a role she did not ask for. Caroline Louise Marguerite Grimaldi entered the world not simply as a daughter, but as a constitutional necessity. The reason traced back to the Franco-Monegasque Treaty of 1918, which stipulated that if Monaco's ruling family failed to produce a clear heir, France could absorb the tiny principality. At just 2 square kilometers and home to roughly 18,000 people in 1957, Monaco was one of the smallest nations on earth. This child, could determine whether it survived as an independent state. The palace issued an official bulletin noting the exact time of her birth, around 4:15 in the afternoon, so that the order of succession could be formally recorded without delay. European newspapers treated the announcement not as a birth notice, but as a constitutional event, with some papers printing legal commentary alongside the news. Caroline was registered as hereditary princess before she had opened her eyes to the light. Yet even that title came wrapped in uncertainty. Under Monaco's succession laws at the time, she was heir presumptive, meaning a younger brother would automatically outrank her. So from her very first days, she existed in a state of conditional importance. She mattered enormously, but only until someone arrived to matter more. That someone arrived 14 months later. On March 14th, 1958, her brother Albert was born, and in an instant, the institutional weight that pressed down on Caroline since birth quietly transferred to him. She went from being Monaco's guarantee to being second in line before she could say a single word. This was not a tragedy anyone spoke about, but it shaped everything. Her mother, Grace Kelly, had walked away from one of the most luminous careers in Hollywood history to become Princess of Monaco. By the time she married Prince Rainier III in 1956, she had an Academy Award, major film roles, and a salary of around $100,000 per picture, equivalent to nearly $1 million in today's terms. She gave all of it up. People close to Grace later said that in private, she mourned what she had lost. She sometimes watched her old films in the palace cinema, not to entertain herself, but to remember who she had once been. The palace was breathtaking, but it was also strict. Servants addressed her formally. Duties came first. Appearances governed everything. For Caroline, growing up inside that world meant growing up with a mother who loved her, but who also seemed confined by a role she had not fully imagined for herself. And her father, Prince Rainier III, who had taken the throne in 1949 at just 25, ran Monaco like a corporation. Staff described the palace as a place where work came before warmth. Rainier could spend 12 hours in meetings and still be signing papers late into the night. The result was a household that looked flawless from the outside and felt cold from within. Courtiers later said Rainier and Grace sometimes ate on separate schedules or in separate rooms. The children dined apart from their parents entirely, a practice enforced by palace etiquette until Caroline was approximately 14 years old. So while the world saw the glittering Monte Carlo life, gala dinners, yacht gatherings, famous guests, Caroline was often sitting alone with silver cutlery laid out perfectly, watched over by tutors and nannies, not by her mother and father. The person who provided the most consistent warmth in her early years was not a royal at all. It was her nanny, Maureen Marion Wood. According to accounts from those close to the family, when Maureen once went away on vacation, both Caroline and Albert cried so desperately that Grace had to call the nanny back early. In a house full of privilege, the most important person in the children's lives was the one the world never photographed. Princess Caroline was academically gifted. She attended St. Mary's School in Ascot in England, then Sciences Po in Paris, then the Sorbonne. She studied philosophy, psychology, and biology. She earned her French baccalaureate with high honors, and teachers praised her intellectual ability. But there was a painful irony embedded in this achievement. The education that was meant to prepare her for a serious adult life also kept her away from any meaningful family warmth during her most formative years. Her father wanted disciplined children, not free spirits. Boarding school abroad delivered exactly that. What it did not deliver was a home life. By the time she arrived at Sciences Po in Paris, Caroline was no longer just a royal student. She had become one of the most photographed young women in Europe. Magazine covers multiplied. Paparazzi followed her through the city. Fashion houses sought her presence. And the world was far more interested in where she went at night than in what she studied during the day. She became a regular in Paris nightlife, places where she could feel, at least briefly, like a young woman rather than an institution. But nothing stayed private. Every outing became a story. Every choice became content. The press turned her social life into a personality, while her genuine academic accomplishments, the high honors, the philosophical studies, the serious coursework, were dismissed in a sentence before cameras rushed back to nightclub photographs and rumors. She was intelligent, educated, and thoughtful. The world decided she was a party princess. In 1978, at 21, Caroline married Philippe Junot, a French businessman 17 years her senior with a reputation for charm and instability. Her parents opposed the match from the beginning. Rainier and Grace saw risk and embarrassment heading toward their daughter with a smile. The wedding was staged with the grandeur Monaco always projected. Hundreds of guests, global attention, all the shine of a modern fairy tale. Behind it, Grace was reportedly devastated, convinced the marriage would not last. She was right. What made the betrayal particularly cruel was not just the marriage itself, but what happened during the honeymoon. Junot reportedly brought along a photographer friend, and private images of Caroline found their way into the tabloids. The woman who had spent her entire life being watched now discovered that the man closest to her could turn even intimacy into a transaction. By October 1980, just over 2 years after the wedding, they were divorced. Caroline was 23. The civil marriage ended, but the Vatican did not grant an annulment for over a decade, leaving her in a painful in-between space. Publicly free, but not fully released in the eyes of the church. When Caroline met Stefano Casiraghi through mutual friends around Sardinia and Corsica in the summer of 1983, both of them were bruised. Grace Kelly had died in the tragic car crash of September 1982, and Caroline was still carrying that loss alongside the wreckage of her first marriage. Stefano was recovering from a broken engagement, but something different happened between them. People around Caroline immediately noticed it. So many men had been drawn to her title, her name, her image. Stefano seemed genuinely uninterested in any of that. He treated her like a person. That distinction, so simple, so rare in her world, made him extraordinary. He was 23, Italian, athletic, confident, and warm. The relationship moved quickly. By December 29, 1983, they were married in a civil ceremony at Monaco's princely palace in the Hall of Mirrors, beneath the portrait of Grace Kelly. The wedding lasted approximately 15 minutes, but it carried enormous meaning. Caroline later described what they had as her fairy tale. Friends called it love at first sight. And for once, the language did not seem like an exaggeration. 3 children followed. Andrea Albert Pierre was born on June 8, 1984. Charlotte Marie Pumline arrived on August 3, 1986. Pierre Rainier Stefano came on September 5, 1987. All born at Princess Grace Hospital in Monaco. The family that Caroline had never quite felt as a child. She was finally building for herself. Stefano was a devoted father and successful businessman, and he was also a daring offshore powerboat racer. He won 12 of 80 offshore races, set a Lake Como speed record of 277 kilometers per hour in 1984, and took the world-class 1 title off New Jersey in 1989. For all that speed, what those around him remarked on most was his devotion to Caroline. He had done what no one before him managed. He had won over Prince Rainier completely, treated almost like a second son. Friends said Stefano made the palace feel less like an institution and more like a home. Caroline blossomed. Reports in the time kept returning to the same observation. For once, the Grimaldi household looked genuinely joyful. Just weeks before what would become a fatal race in September 1990, there had already been a frightening explosion involving Stefano's boat off the coast of Guernsey. He survived it. The warning was there. On October 3rd, 1990, off Monaco's coast near Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferret, racing in a 42-foot catamaran, the boat struck heavy waves and flipped violently at shocking speed. Co-pilot Patrice Innocenti was thrown clear and survived. Stefano was not. He was 30 years old. Their children were 6, 4, and 3. Caroline was in Paris when it happened. When she returned to Monaco, she came dressed in black, a widow at 33. For the second time in less than a decade that the sea or the roads of Monaco had taken someone she loved. Her mother had died on those mountain roads. Her husband died in those waters, within sight of the palace. The funeral took place at St. Nicholas Cathedral, echoing Grace's own funeral just 8 years earlier. The grief that followed was, by account from those who knew her, the kind that hollows a person out. There were whispers that deepened the darkness. Friends claimed Stefano had received death threats in the days before the crash, that there had been concerns about bombs, fears tied to business circles. Police investigated the possibility of sabotage, particularly because the boat had not been fully guarded in the lead-up to the race. In the end, authorities ruled an accident. The official answer closed the investigation, but could not quiet the feeling that the loss had arrived with uncommon cruelty. Caroline disappeared from public life. She moved with her 3 young children to a quiet village in France, far from cameras, far from the palace, and far from the water she now associated with catastrophe. Those who saw her afterward described someone transformed by grief. Quieter, thinner, a person who had endured more than anyone should before 35. She told her children that their father was with Jesus in heaven, and that they would look after each other now. It was a sentence that carried the whole shape of a new life. Years later, Princess Caroline entered her 3rd marriage. On January 23, 1999, her own 42nd birthday, she wed Prince Ernst August of Hanover in a civil ceremony at Monaco's princely palace. The relationship had begun in the mid-1990s, amid considerable controversy. Ernst was still married to Chantal Hochley, who had once been a friend of Caroline's. The press called it a royal triangle and fed on it for years. Ernst August finalized his divorce from Chantal in 1997. Their daughter Alexandra was born on July 20th, 1999, just 6 months after the wedding. Some in the tabloids immediately noticed and turned into fresh scandal, counting weeks backward in print. But the deeper wound of this marriage came from Ernst himself. Over the years, public reports accumulated of outbursts, violent behavior, and public humiliation. There were widely covered incidents, including a psychiatric episode after an especially alarming breakdown that forced Caroline to navigate chaos in private, while maintaining dignity in public. According to reporting from Hello magazine and other European outlets, Ernst was separated from Caroline in everything but paperwork by 2009, when she reportedly discovered him with a French socialite and left, never truly returning. They remain legally married to this day. On April 6, 2005, Prince Rainier III died at the age of 81 after serious health failure. The blow was made even more disorienting because the day before Rainier's death, Ernst August had slipped into a coma from acute pancreatitis. Caroline, then 48, found herself moving between 2 hospital rooms and a state funeral, under the eyes of the entire world. She buried her father on April 15th and somehow kept standing. The Grimaldi family has lived inside grief for so long that the losses have begun to blur into one long wound. Grace Kelly died in 1982. Stefano Casiraghi died in 1990. Rainier III died in 2005. And when Princess Charlene faced severe health struggles beginning in 2021, a long and publicly concerning absence from Monaco, Caroline stepped in again, quietly filling the space that needed steadying. Then on January 8, 2026, Philippe Junot, Caroline's first husband, died in Madrid at the age of 85. His daughter Victoria announced his passing, describing a long and adventurous life. For Caroline, who had been just 21 when she married him and 23 when they divorced, it must have felt like the closing of a very old chapter. He had thrown her young life into scandal. He had sold her honeymoon. He had been the first man to turn her into a product. and now he was gone. In December 2024, Fernanda BFI Casiraghi, Stefano's mother, died at 99 in Fiano Murasco, just months before her 100th birthday. Caroline attended the funeral with Andrea, Charlotte, and Pierre. That quiet appearance, more than 3 decades after Stefano's death, said something that required no commentary. The bond with his family had never broken. Here is what is not often said about Princess Caroline. She has spent her adult life turning grief into institutions. As early as 1979, when she was just 22, her parents made her president of Monaco's Committee for the International Year of the Child. The role launched a lifetime of child advocacy. In 1981, she founded Jeune J'écoute, a telephone helpline for young people struggling with drug abuse, neglect, and suicidal thoughts. The service trained dozens of counselors and handled thousands of calls per year. After Grace's death in 1982, Rainier appointed Caroline president of the Princess Grace Foundation, and she carried forward her mother's artistic commitments with deep personal investment. By 1984, she was leading the Printemps de Arts Festival. In 1985, she launched the Ballet de Monte Carlo, which celebrated its 40th anniversary in 2025, a milestone she marked with the same quiet pride she brings to everything. She later led the Prince Pierre Foundation, the Monte Carlo Philharmonic Orchestra, and a range of contemporary art programs that helped define Monaco's cultural identity for a new generation. In 2003, the Director General of UNESCO appointed Caroline as a Goodwill Ambassador, recognizing her personal commitment to programs for women's and girls' education globally. She has also served as a UNICEF patron, using her platform to support children in war zones, trafficking victims, and young people without access to education. In 2025 alone, her public commitments range from presiding over nursing graduation ceremonies to presenting the annual Prince Pierre Foundation prizes alongside Prince Albert. She inaugurated La Bouquinerie, a new space dedicated to books and reading in Monaco. In December 2025, alongside her brother, she officially opened the Mediathèque Caroline, a unified multimedia cultural hub within the Islet Pasteur complex, featuring a 118-seat auditorium and dedicated areas for digital learning. She also made a historic announcement. Natalie Stutzman, 60, was appointed as the Monte Carlo Philharmonic Orchestra's 19th artistic director, becoming the first woman to hold the position since the orchestra's founding in 1856. In October 2025, France awarded Caroline the Grand Cross of the National Order of Merit, a recognition of a lifetime of service that extends well beyond Monaco's borders. At 69, Princess Caroline stands as one of the most quietly extraordinary women in European royal history. Not because of the tragedies that found her, but because of what she refused to let them take from her. She was born into a role she did not choose. She lost her status before she could speak. She ate her meals alone in a palace full of people. She watched her mother grieve a life given up. She married a man who sold her privacy. She buried a husband she actually loved, who died within sight of her home. She stood at 2 hospital bedsides at once while her country watched. She endured public humiliation in a 3rd marriage and chose dignity over retaliation. She has never truly spoken about the full weight of any of it. And yet, the Ballet de Monte Carlo exists. The Princess Grace Foundation continues. The Mediathèque Caroline is open. Young people who once had nowhere to turn could call a helpline that she built. Girls in countries she will never visit are being educated under initiatives she helped fund. Cultural life in Monaco thrives in part because she chose to fill the silence with something lasting. Her daughter Charlotte Casiraghi once reflected that sad events happen to everyone, even when they arrive early and leave deep marks. In that observation, you hear something of Caroline herself, a woman who chose, after every blow, not to disappear into the darkness, but to build something visible in it. She has never been Monaco's ruler. She has never held a throne. The palace system that once treated her birth as a constitutional event quietly moved its attention to her brother, then to her brother's children. But there is an argument to be made, quietly, honestly, in the way she herself would prefer, that Caroline of Monaco has served her family and her country more faithfully, more consistently, and more personally than any title could have required of her. The fairy tale was never quite what it looked like from outside the palace walls. The real story is harder, older, and far more worth telling.